Realist Research was Tracy Carr, who's on the team with us. Tracy was my postdoc at the time and is now, as of this year, an assistant professor in the same department. So Tracy and I have been working together, and most of our research has been, like I said, realist research. And with this particular project, what happened, if I'm just going to tell you the story of how this team all came together, what happened is I was on a plane coming back from the Canadian Medical Association Health Summit, and I happened to be sitting beside a colleague, an obstetrician, and she was telling me in a very excited way all about the work she was doing with Sanctum Care Group, which is what we did this evaluation on. And as she got telling and very animated, telling me about the work that she was doing with them, she was a board member. I said, well, I'm assuming that you have a whole program of research to document the work that you're doing. And she said, oh, no, I'm an obstetrician. I don't know how to do research. None of us on the board know how to do research. And we're a small, not-for-profit organization. So we'd love to, but we have no capacity. And so I said, well, you know, I could probably help you if you want. And so I ended up going to their board meeting and talking to them a little bit about realist research and saying, you know, I could maybe help you. And we've got some, I have another postdoc at that point who would be interested. He was a previous pastor, and he had the right heart for that kind of work. And so we got started. And then from there, we applied for a grant. We were successful. Our main funding agent in Canada is CIHR, Canadian Institute for Health Research, and we were successful in getting a grant with CIHR. My postdoc had moved on at that point, and we hired Anum to come and work with us. Anum was an MD looking for an internship residency position somewhere, and sort of a little bit in limbo. And so I took her as a research assistant, and she led most of this work and did it together with Melissa, who you're going to meet, who is a person with lived experience and our person with lived experience researcher. And I think that's critical. We didn't just have patient partners, we had a patient partner researcher on our team, which was a new experience for us, and it was an awesome experience. And that's really the journey we're going to share with you today. We presented that initial sort of work and program theory and how we were going to move forward at a virtual realist conference. And then I got a phone, actually, I think it was an email from Mara, and I'd never met Mara before. It was out of the blue. She called, emailed me from BC and said she's a nursing professor out there who'd gotten very interested in doing realist research and was willing to work with us if we were interested. And that started another journey. And so that brought this team that you're going to hear from today together, and we together did the work from that point on. Next slide. So our purpose today from our perspective is not so much to share with you the results. I mean, we have a publication that's out and another one that's coming, and some technical reports that we can reference. But our purpose is really to share what it was like to do this collaboration and having patient researchers working together with academic researchers and closely together with the Sanctum board in terms of how not only framing up the research that we did, but how this realist research has informed work at the Sanctum care home. So with that, I will turn it over. Next slide.
Hello, everybody. I'm Maura McPhee, and I would like to do a land acknowledgement from Vancouver, British Columbia, where I am a white settler. And I respectfully acknowledge that I live, work, teach, and study on the traditional, ancestral, unceded lands of the Musqueam people. Next slide, please. As a white settler and my colleagues who are also white settlers, we have gratitude for being here in this beautiful land, beautiful country. And I want to read something from Chief Seale, who's known as Chief Seattle, who was a peacemaker on the Northwest Coast during the time of white settlement and colonization. And I think some of the most important lessons we learn from Indigenous peoples is how we are all interconnected and part of the land. And so we have to remember in gratitude that Indigenous peoples and their ancestors are the stewards of this land, and their respect, love, and duty for this land is a priceless gift to us all. And as Chief Seale said, man did not weave the web of life. He's merely a strand in it. Whatever he does to the web, he does to himself. All things are connected. And so we really appreciate being able to share our work that comes from this land that is under the stewardship of our Indigenous people. Thank you.
Next slide. Gary, I, and Melissa right now are on Treaty 6 territory, unlike Mora. Treaties were signed with the Crown on the lands that are now Saskatchewan, which are also the homeland of the Métis people, who were descendants of both First Nations people and the European settlers who came here. Myself, I am a descendant of Northern European peoples, and I've been privileged to work alongside many First Nations and Métis people, and am grateful to be here today. I put my backdrop as, you know, Saskatchewan is mostly flat. We don't have mountains. And unfortunately, much of Canada is on fire right now. So we're experiencing that reality. We have not been good stewards of the land, unfortunately. So the next slide talks about the process of the truth and reconciliation process that Canada underwent a number of years ago. And it was a response to our rather tragic legacy of colonialism in this country that has led to profoundly deleterious impacts on the health and well-being of Indigenous peoples. Now, having said that, the research lens that Gary's team takes is very much a strengths-based approach. And when working with communities and Indigenous peoples, and in living in the spirit of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, we as researchers put the lens on the strengths that Indigenous peoples bring and work alongside them to understand the realist questions, which is how, why, and in what respects programs like Sanctum, the one we'll talk about today, will provide support to people who have experienced those effects due to colonialism. So in the next slide, to put more context to Sanctum itself, it was a program that was born out of some dramatically high HIV rates in Saskatchewan, twice the national average. And we come from Saskatoon, where the program is situated. There were two programs that we evaluated. One was for pregnant women who were at risk or had acquired HIV, and then that meant that their children were at risk of vertical transmission. The other program were for people who were living with HIV. The supports were around housing, supportive care, under the principles of harm reduction. So these aren't abstinence programs. These are programs that are really focused on a family environment and and acceptance of where clients and residents are at. So we'll talk more about that when we talk about the program theories. So the next slide is a snippet from the program that helps women who are pregnant, who are possibly at risk of having their children apprehended. Since Sangdom has been in operation, 97% of women either retain their children or their children go into care of their families. So in terms of outcome, that's been a very positive one, and this video will show you some of the details around why.
The strength and the resiliency of the women that we've had the privilege to work with is unprecedented. They want so deeply to be a mother and a good mother. We don't look at them and say, what do you know, what do you don't know? We direct them in a more rounded approach. Some moms may need help mixing formula. Some of them may have never mixed formula before. It's the basics. This is how you wash a baby. This is how you diaper a baby. We show them baby being weighed. We show them that, hey, baby's growing. You're doing such a good job.
If Legacy had got taken away from the hospital, my recovery would not exist right now. I would be numbing the pain of not being with her. Sanctum has helped me realize that I can and I do deserve to be a mother. When Kathy told me that, it made me cry, because I've never had anybody tell me that before, that I deserve to parent Legacy and that I deserve to be her mother.
For many of them, this is the first time they've been given the opportunity to demonstrate that they can parent. So it's a fresh start for mom, but it's also a fresh start for baby. Not only through the perinatal stage are we increasing health outcomes for baby in terms of having a healthy pregnancy and for mom, but more importantly, that baby is going to bond with its mother. And that attachment is so critical to the development of that baby moving forward.
The need in Saskatoon for an organization like Sanctum 1.5 is enormous. I can't even find the words. I mean, Caitlin has provided a structure and a model that doesn't exist elsewhere, but meets the community right where they need the help. Being able to anticipate and respond to those needs in such an individualized way, and in a community of women that can be very difficult to engage, is a monstrous task, and they've done it beautifully.
When I look at the women that have come into our program and have graduated into the community with their children, I think about how different it would look if we weren't here, and that scares me, because those women have demonstrated in a very short period of time that not only are they capable, they are amazing parents and they love their children.
They made it easier for me by just being there for support and emotional support. Whenever I needed them to talk, they were there, they understood. They didn't judge me. They made me feel accepted and normal. Like, you know, like I'm not someone who should be shunned and put in the corner, and like, you know, that I'm a horrible person for what I do. They made me feel like I was human.
Sanctum pretty much like cared about me until I was strong enough to care about myself. And now I have a home. I even have the hopes that I'll get my son back in my life. There's actually potential for things to get better. I owe everything to them.
So Anam and Melissa now are going to have a conversation about their process, which, as Gary said, this is really the message that we want to share about our research.
Right. So my name is Anam. I'm currently in Joondalup, which is the land of the Murro country in Perth, Australia. I'm originally of Pakistani descent, and I had settled on Indigenous Treaty 6 territory where the research had occurred. Melissa, did you want to introduce yourself a little?
I'm Melissa April. So I come with lived experience and I was a co-researcher on this.
So the way we're gonna go about with the next few slides is just basically reflecting on our research project. This has started from the beginning of the pandemic, and Melissa has basically been part of the entire leaf, as you see over here, the entire tree. So she started from developing the research questions to now publishing and presenting. So just going to the next slide. Melissa, do you want to share how you got connected with the project and how we ended up going through this?
Yeah, so actually when I was living in Sanctum 1.5, Ali came to see me. And yeah, and just explained that there's this project that they were working on. And I was kind of not knowing what I was going to do after I left Sanctum. So I was very interested and wanting to join.
And whereabouts in your pregnancy were you at that time?
I was almost due, so I believe I was just ready to go give birth.
I think we met a little bit later on. So this was after the grant had been established, and Ali had asked me to contact you alongside another patient partner who was, so there's two different projects that we were working on, Sanctum 1.5 and Sanctum 1.0. And can you just talk a bit about how we first met and how we got connected and how we built trusts?
So I think the biggest thing is you were still pregnant, and I think I was about 9 months pregnant, or my baby was about 9 months. So we connected a lot through just being moms. And yeah, sharing stories. I was always asking a lot of questions about what I should do with baby or how she's reacting, if she was eating enough, those kinds of things. So I think that's how we really built trust and connected, is just being moms.
So when we first started the project, we actually had to go through the entire stage where we actually did a little bit of learning how to do interviews, learning how to do patient partner experiences. Melissa was actually alongside another patient partner, Richard. Did you want to talk a little bit about him?
Yeah, so Richard, he was one of our co-researchers. He sadly passed away during our research process, but he was a very big part of the research process. He actually came up with the questions for the Sanctum 1.0. And yeah, just seeing him in our group setting, it just made me feel more comfortable knowing that there was another peer there.
Yeah, so when we originally started, it was the four of us. So it was me, Ali, Melissa, and Richard. And the way we had basically did most of our research was actually online via Teams and being connected to the internet. And just the reason we have a butterfly here on the slide is actually in the beginning of our research, just after we had developed questions, Richard had unfortunately passed away, but he was such a vital part of this entire experience that we continue to acknowledge all of the efforts that he had put into this in the first place. And so when Melissa talked about, building trust, that a lot of our first meetings were just about talking, not necessarily about research, but just talking about what happened in our day-to-day lives too. And I think one of the biggest things we had was flexibility, especially with Melissa being a new mom and myself being a new mom and Richard having some experiences up and down with his health. And so I think that really helped us being able to be really flexible with the times that we had. And so just going on to the next slide, did you want to talk about how we came up with the questions, Melissa?
So I think when I started, they were kind of already a set kind of assigned questions. But I just kind of helped with asking them so that people would understand them. So asking questions in a context that they would understand them. A lot of people don't have very high education in the programs. So yeah, just so that they would understand the questions properly. I also helped with like making sure that there was nothing triggering in any of the questions, because we definitely didn't want to trigger somebody to want to go out and use. And yeah, it was lots of fun.
And then just about practicing the questions and
Oh yeah, and we practiced a lot. Me and Richard went back and forth. So he would ask me Sanctum 1.0 questions, just so we build up our confidence enough to be able to ask them in a good way, and like make sure that we were asking them in a good way. And yeah.
And I think it was just prior to participant recruitment that Richard had passed away. So Melissa, how did it feel taking both projects in at once?
Well, I was a little bit hesitant to, because Richard put so much into it, and he was a peer mentor at the Sanctum 1.0 program. So Sanctum was a big part of his life. And I didn't want to take away that, but I thought working with Richard that he would still want the research to be done. So I felt okay doing it. But yeah, it was a little bit hard.
I think some of the original like troubleshooting that we had to do was just to figure out how to put everything online. It was a really good thing, Melissa. You were so technologically ready with computers and Zoom and telephone calls. But I think with Richard, we had to take a bit more time. I remember Ollie had to go to his house at one point in time just to try to get everything set up. And then even when we did the lessons for patient-oriented research, going through some of those workshops, can you describe a bit of your experiences, how you felt doing those?
So there was a lot of stuff that I didn't kind of understand, but Anam, you were there with us. Me and Richard and Anam actually worked together on all of them. So she asked if there's anything we didn't understand. We didn't even really have to ask. She was already explaining it to us, so that was really helpful. And yeah, it was a little bit scary because I mean, I have a grade 10 education. I don't have any really work history. So like this was a little bit yeah, it was a little bit scary, but Anam made it very easy.
Thank you. And so once we've just developed the questions, I think we were ready for recruiting participants. And this was where you were this was where you took on from the rest of the research. Can you talk a bit about how you recruited participants?
Okay, so originally I think we got kind of a list from the social worker at Sanctum 1.5. And I just ended up recognizing a lot of the names because I'm in the same area that a lot of these women are from, and I know them from my history. So I asked, and I was like, well, do you think I could just reach out to them through social media? Because a lot of the numbers that we were calling weren't connected anymore. We were having trouble connecting with them over phone. So I was like, well, why don't I just try to get a hold of them on social media? And yeah, that's how I ended up getting a hold of most of the recruitments, is just through social media and yeah, my contacts.
Why do you think they were ready to get in contact with you?
Well, I think just because they knew me, or they maybe if they didn't know me, but they kind of knew of me from my name around. I don't know. Just instantly having that connection and knowing that I was probably a safe person to talk to. So I think that's why they felt comfortable.
And then going from there, you basically started leading the interviews as well. Can you talk a bit about that process?
Yeah, so when I started the interviews, I think our first one, it was like a little bit, we didn't get very much information, so we were feeling a little bit down. But honestly, it took off from there. I thought of ways that I could maybe make it not so just like I'm asking questions, and maybe more of just having a conversation with them. And I found that was really helpful in them opening up and sharing stories with us. So I think we're allowed to get a lot more data, going at it from just me sharing my experience within the program as I'm asking the questions as well.
And then I remember for that part, we would create a Zoom meeting. I would introduce myself, and then I would silent myself so that Melissa had full control over the interview. But if there were certain questions that I was curious about, I would send Melissa those questions via text message or via Teams chat. And then if she felt it was appropriate, she would ask those questions. But the entire control was in your hands. Yeah. And then I think after the first interview, we would always go back to the team and just make sure that we were getting the right questions answered, making sure that we were going through the right process, because realist research was new for both you and me. So it was definitely ongoing process, an iterative process. And then once we had the research, can you talk a bit about how we analyzed it? Because analysis was new for you as well.
Yeah, so I did a lot of reading through the interviews and then got introduced to Nanivo. So that was interesting. There's a lot of watching YouTube videos and trying to figure out working with Mora and working and learning all about the buckets. I'll never forget the bucket. But yeah, just like reading over their quotes and stuff, and just like, I don't know, it was good.
I think it was helpful because I know nothing about the context of the life that you had lived with. And so when I did the Nanivo coding, I had sometimes different interpretations compared to what you had. And so I think it was really interesting just recognizing why some of those codings were more important, had more significance towards the research that we were doing. And I think that was really helpful, just learning from your experience and then getting a deeper understanding of the program theory.
Yeah, I also liked like the back and forth between me, you, and Mora. We would all have kind of a different understanding of what the quote meant. So it was like a lot about, yeah, I don't know. It was a lot of fun. I had fun doing that.
Yeah, I think, yeah, with Mora, it was actually very helpful trying to connect all the buckets together too, because at one point in time I was like, I don't know what I'm doing, and I had to restart a few times. Yeah. And then so from there we actually ended up working with creating some of their initial CMOs, and I think that's when we first presented back to Sanctum. Is that right?
Mhm.
Do you want to talk about your experience with your first presentation back?
So it was a little bit like stressful, but I recognize a lot of the faces because, like I said, I lived at Sanctum. I actually work at Sanctum now, so I've seen a lot of the people that were in the meeting around there. And Kate's amazing, and she's like always so awesome and welcoming. So I think that made it a little bit easier. But yeah, it was definitely like I I get pretty shy. And I tend to try to talk, but then I lose train of thought. And so, yeah, so it was a process. It was good though. I learned a lot from it.
How has this research helped you now? Because this project was about a year ago now, almost.
Mhm. So it's actually helped me a lot. Like, I'm using all the knowledge that I got from this research project, and I'm also involved in another research project now. Through Hope Through Strength. So I'm taking all that knowledge that I've been using, and now I have another job in research as another co-researcher. So I'm doing all the things that I did in this research project within that research project now. So.
Were there any, like, what challenges did you think you faced in this research, or what experiences did you think that were really meaningful with this research?
So the challenges, I guess, maybe we should have met face to face before we went to a conference in Vancouver, but that's just again with our schedules and being new moms and COVID and everything. So that was a little bit different. Just kind of, I mean, it was easy. We all connected well, but maybe it would have been better to meet in person while we were in Saskatchewan. But and the things that I get from this is just like Sanctum 1.5 came into my life when I was at the very lowest part in my life. Like, I was at the lowest I've ever been. I was homeless and I was pregnant. Sanctum took me off the streets and gave me a home, a place to get healthy so that I could have a healthy pregnancy and have a healthy baby. So it's like the program is so important to me, and I just really love it so much. So this research has just like given me a way to give back almost. I don't know how to explain it, but like yeah, this was just a really important project to me because I did live through the program and I experienced everything. And I just want to get the word out about how amazing it is. So
and then was it difficult trying to, other than using social media, but actually interviewing the other moms, doing it via computer? Can you talk about your
oh yeah.
experience?
So a lot of the people that we did try to interview, a lot of them didn't have access to phones or internet. So we had a little bit of issues trying to actually set the interviews. So it was like a lot of touch and go, meeting people kind of where they're at. So it was like, if we could book an interview that day, we would have to like get together and get that interview done today. Like it wasn't booking ahead really. It was kind of like we need to get it done right now because they're available. But yeah.
And oftentimes we'd hear the babies in the background and just
Oh yeah.
work through that.
Yeah, and like I had my daughter with me a lot of the time too, and she was always talking in the background, and they had their baby, so I think it was just a more comfortable, just kind of conversation.
Yeah, I agree. And then so just talking about this, so this is one of the slides that we had presented to the Sanctum board. This is after we had made our context mechanism outcomes and just trying to break it down in a way that the community could understand. Do you want to talk a bit about the slide and then I will follow in after?
Okay, for sure. So like before entry, that would be like active addiction, all the kinds of things, or trying to get on meds, those kinds of things. Entry would just be like, so everybody welcoming you, not judgmental staff, just being there to welcome you. And then the detoxing, a lot of times the staff would help while you're detoxing and let you rest. And unfortunately, there is a lot of relapse. This is a harm reduction program. So if they're not kicked out if they do relapse, there is a certain amount of chances that they get, and they work with them to get them the supports they need, rather than just kicking them out of the program. And then some, unfortunately, do not graduate the program because of certain factors that come into play. But the cool thing about Sanctum is the absolutely last option is to find a spot in foster care. So they will reach out to all family members from everywhere to make sure that those babies go with family. So that's a really cool thing about Sanctum as well. After that would be the healing. So the healing is just, honestly, for me, it was bonding with Cassidy. That's where all my healing came into play. It was like, as soon as I held my daughter in my arms, I was like, okay, I'm done. Like this is the most important thing ever. So that was my healing. I'm sure everybody else's is different, but that was my healing. And then, yeah, the transition to the community. So that's just where they were going after. Some people would need a little bit extra support. So they would probably go into like assisted living or sober living. And then a lot just could go into the community. And then, yeah, your independence.
So when we originally came up with this, as Moira puts it, the loops of intestine, it was with the different stages of the program. So Moira had helped us figure out what the stages of the program were. The stars represent all the mechanisms that came in place. So before entry, the chance to be able to keep your baby, that was one of the major mechanisms that then moved on to the outcome, which was entering into the program. And so each of those stars represent specific mechanisms that kind of helped you move from one stage to the other. And I think that's to provide context mechanism outcomes in a more easily viewable way for the community, and how each of those areas are where those mechanisms are important to go. I think that was a big part in how we described what we've been doing so far, because it's kind of hard to describe to the normal, not the normal community, like the lay community, what context mechanism outcomes were. And so that was how we broke it down, just based on what Melissa were able to translate, what I was able to translate to the community. And I think this is Morris.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, I would say that we had a lot of fun doing this. It was an amazing experience for me to work with the whole team, but especially with Melissa, because I think as a researcher, you know, I'm used to going out, doing my own, creating my own questions, doing my own interviews, doing my own interpretation. And it was so different doing this with Melissa, because I think I had kind of I took things for granted having a PhD, and that's wrong. I don't have that lived experience. And so having Melissa there was so valuable. And even putting together the program theory in the visual way with the loops, we played around with that for a long time to decide on a visual representation that everybody could understand and that Melissa could explain to colleagues. So we just have a few of the CMOs with quotes to share with you. And these are actually quotes that Melissa helped us pick out that she thought were most meaningful representations of CMOs. So as Melissa mentioned, at entry, that's really when moms make that decision that they want to join Sanctum. And I don't know, Melissa, do you want to talk a little bit about what it was that, you know, what people said to you that convinced you that, I mean, from an Indigenous perspective, that this would be a good place for you, a good fit for you?
Yeah, so I guess they just talked about a lot of spiritual connection and cultural connection, especially in 1.0. Just because I think a lot of them go there when they're really ill and really sick, and they're looking for that higher power or the spirituality, yeah, to be able to help them, to point them in the right direction, kind of thing. With Sanctum 1.5, I think when you are healing, when you're to the stage where you're ready to heal, I think having a cultural connection can help you in a huge way. Just having the connection to your roots, knowing where you came from. There's so much healing in that. And I think it really needs to be incorporated into any part.
Thanks, Melissa. Yeah, it was, it came through in all the transcripts, that need to kind of regain a sense of who you are. And we thought about different ways of describing it. We called it self-worth, but it was really kind of that increased pride in your roots, where you come from, and reclaiming that. So we attach different labels to it, but we think that the quotes are particularly powerful. Next slide, please. So during the healing process, as Melissa said, you know, that's when she had time to really bond with her daughter, with Cassidy. And so bonding was important. We didn't put that particular one in here. I do want to say that we played around with a lot of words. We thought about attachment. We thought about learning to love your baby, but the women, and Melissa described it really as bonding. So that is one of the CMOs that we did create, but we picked out a CMO to share with you, a healing one that again talks about the importance of the Indigenous supports and having that spiritual reconnection to who you are. Melissa, do you want to add anything to this in the quote?
So I just want to share a little bit about the bond. So I had 2 children before I had my last daughter, and they were apprehended at birth. And I can't stress enough how important that bond is. And yeah, me speaking to all the other women, there's just really no other word. It's just like that bond, that love you share. I just couldn't find another word for it, so that's why we choose to use bond. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things I learned, is that with you know, when you're doing realist work, you're always looking for mid-range theories to help you support the mechanisms that you're choosing. And sometimes you just have to go with the words that individuals use. And in the transcripts, bonding really came through, along with this feeling of healing more completely because of spiritual reconnection. We found that was especially important with a community where many of the women were Indigenous. And so the sanctum really made efforts to have elders there, to have different cultural arts activities that would be meaningful to women. Melissa, you want to talk about some of the things that are there at Sanctum?
So when I was there was a cultural support worker. So she was there if you were feeling down, you could go down there and smudge. She also brought you out to like she would help you do anything. If you wanted to like make a ribbon skirt, she would help you do that. And if you just wanted to go out and talk by the river, she would go do that. So it was just kind of like everybody was in a different space in their recovery or their healing process. So it was cool to just have somebody to meet you where you're at and yeah, be there for you if you wanted them.
Thank you. And now next slide, please. So one of the things that's also important is the amount of support that people receive that helps them to feel like they can go into the community and be independent. However, they also have that connection that remains. So even after transition to community, one of the things that was really stressed by the women is that opportunity to go back or to have people visit them, that they never felt they were really alone, that they continued to have help even after they transitioned into the community. So Melissa, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the really cool thing about Sanctum is they call you the Sanctum family. It's like they still have like barbecues and stuff. We still get together. But for me, when I originally left, I could call, I could go there, whatever I wanted. They used to have Sunday suppers. COVID happened. I don't know if they're still doing that. But Sunday, they kind of opened it to anybody who wanted to come stop by, and they would have supper for you. You just have to call and say that you're coming in. So I think that's really cool. They just built a sense of community and a sense of family within the Sanctum programs.
And they help not only with housing, but also with a lot of the paperwork that goes into getting different types of supports around what we call the social determinants of health. So transportation, jobs, food, all of those things. And also in terms of getting children back who have gone into foster care, that moms are able to get their children back, and Sanctum helps with that. Melissa, anything else to add to that?
Yeah, so I think Sanctum helped me with my ID, with my taxes, all the things you would need to get out into the community, I guess. They helped me with letters for court when I went to go get my children back into my care. Yeah.
Thank you, Melissa. So I think this is the last slide of the different CMOs, Anum? Yeah, so I'll turn it over to, is it Gary or Tracy?
Yeah. No, I'm going to pick up again. So one of the principles that were really important to us as a research team was that the work that we were doing belonged to the Sanctum Care Group and to the board. They didn't, I think because they were new working with researchers, there's always in Saskatchewan and in Canada in general, there's a long legacy of researchers coming in and doing research on Indigenous communities and Indigenous people, and sometimes doing a very, very bad job of that. And so they have a lot of anxiety and stress around what are you trustworthy? Can we work with you? And while they knew me in some way, but they didn't know me in this way of doing research with them. And so that idea that this work belonged to them is really pretty important. We call it OCAP. It's a principle. And the other principle is reciprocity, that we give something back to the community that we work with. And I think, I hope that Melissa, you felt that there was some reciprocity, there was some giving back to not just you, but also to Sanctum. When we finally did report back our final report, it was a tough group. They peppered us with some really hard questions. I think that comes out of that, like, are you judging us? And once they realized we weren't, it really shifted the tone of that conversation around the technical reports that we provided them. And sort of some of the things they said at the end when we said, this is what we're hearing, there were things that Melissa and Anam came up with in terms of mechanisms that were off the radar of their board. The cultural things, for example, they did that, but it wasn't the significance of it for why there was success in Sanctum was off their radar to some extent. And so that was really important. An elder that had joined their board since we started, like that joined in the middle of that I knew from other work that I've done, said to me, you know, like he thought this was all great. In terms of next steps, he was thinking that it would be really good to have a better understanding, a realist sort of, he didn't use the word realist, that's my word. He would, a realist understanding of what's going on with the people that don't come to Sanctum, where that entry doesn't happen, or at the other end when the transition, because not everybody transitions well into community. So he said those are a couple areas where they think they could do some other work. But Melissa, you're working there now. What else has the board actually done in terms of using some of the work that you did?
So the cool thing, actually with the program that I'm working with now is a Hope Through Strength. We actually have a cultural facilitator, and she's been going actually into Sanctum and doing some of her cultural stuff because of what they heard from our work. So I thought that was really cool.
And that's another CIHR funded research project, a different research group, but just taking what we've done and going the next step with it. Next slide. So this is one of the publications that we've already have out. We're submitting a couple others with the final results. We produced the 2 technical reports, and we're now doing 2 academic reports. You have my website there that has those technical reports on them. And next slide. And
Yuri, I just put in the chat what I meant to mention when I was talking about our more of the macro context in which this work occurred around the TRC and the legacy around colonialism, is our realist synthesis on trust and worldview, because those mechanisms play such a profound role in relationships with Indigenous communities. And that was a piece of work we did a few years ago that I think is something that we keep in mind when we continue to work in community.
Absolutely. And then one of the next slide, then one of the other things that I would add is when I first began doing research and realist research, one of my very first projects was to try and understand decision making that was made with Indigenous cancer patients. And I did that. I did the interviews. I interviewed a number of Indigenous cancer survivors, some of which have passed since. But I did them with an Indigenous scholar. We went together and did those interviews. They were some of the richest interviews I've ever done in my career. They were often an hour and a half long. And I remember at one point there was a gentleman. I'm sorry, I'm just going to tell you the story. There was a gentleman who was telling us his story, and then he just asked me to turn off the tape recorder, and he said, "Now I understand what you're trying to ask me." And because she, the Indigenous scholar that was with me, is with you. I'm going to tell you what you're looking for. And then we had another hour-long conversation. And that's the power of having somebody who's trusted by the person you're interviewing. So the work that we would never have gotten an understanding, a depth of understanding of what's going on at Sanctum for the women without Melissa being an active part of the research team. You know, that's an evolution of our working together as a research group, is having people with lived experience being co-researchers, and it really, from my perspective, makes all the difference in the world. Melissa and Anam co-presented in Vancouver at the Developmental Origins of Health and Disease Conference, which was another, from my perspective, as the PI on the grant, it was very, very rewarding to see the two of them presenting this work together. Maybe I'll let them comment on what that was like in a moment. And then one last slide, and then we'll open up for some questions. Actually, I think there's a couple more slides. Just some acknowledgements once again for Richard and his contributions before he passed, and all the people that worked with us. And then one last slide, just with some contact information. And I'll let you, Nam and Melissa, talk just maybe momentarily about what it was like to do that presentation in Vancouver at that conference. And then we'll open for questions.
So I think that was the first time Melissa and I had actually met in person, because that was just as COVID was opening up. This was one of the first conferences that had happened. So it's really interesting seeing a person that I had seen only on the laptop in face-to-face in real life. And Melissa, did you want to talk about your experiences with presenting at a conference?
Yeah, so it was really interesting. And it was really nerve-wracking. First, because I had never been on a plane. I had never been to the ocean. I've never been, I kind of just been around Saskatoon. So there's a lot of firsts. It was my first time at a conference. So it was very nerve-wracking. It was a lot of fun. I think I worked myself up a lot more than I had to. I was expecting something different. The DOHAD conference, it was just very accepting and like, yeah, it was good.
And with that, we'll open it up for some questions. I hope there's some time.
Oh, Gary, it's Maura. I just wanted to add that that was the first time I met everybody in person. Gary wasn't there, but everybody else was there. And the thing that really amazed me was that Melissa just figured out the buses and went on her own down to the inner city area of Vancouver, where there are many people who have mental health and addictions issues. And she wanted to go down and meet people there and see what it's like down there. And there's also a high proportion of Indigenous people in what we call our downtown east side. And so I was just, you know, when she said, "Oh, I'm just going to go down on the bus and go walk around and talk to people," but you gain such, I mean, you just went out and did that, Melissa, in a very big city. So I was really impressed by that.
I just remember Melissa looking across at you when we took off from Saskatoon, and you looked over and said, "Oh, that wasn't that bad."
I'm assuming that the silence means that you finished. So I don't even know where to start. That, I think, is one of the best presentations I've ever heard. I'm actually quite emotional. I got quite emotional at a number of points all the way through. I think I'm actually fighting tears right now. There are so many things that I found really emotive. So I do think that it is one of the best presentations I think I've facilitated. So thank you so much for coming on. And in our usual manner, can everyone turn on cameras and mics, and as we would if we were in a conference hall, we will get up and we'll give these people a big round of applause. I'm going to stand up because I think that really deserves a standing ovation. So thank you. So whilst I walk people can people just put some questions in the chat that you have for the people? I mean, I have so many things. I could actually talk to you for hours just ask questions. And I think I get the impression that without Melissa, this research would not have been this research. And I had already got that picture from Maura anyway. And the work that I'm doing with Maura is currently working in severe mental illness, and I can absolutely see the parallels and the learnings that we can take, and that Maura probably already has naturally brought to the project anyway. But I can just see how this can move across. But one of the things that I'm really, really intrigued to find out from Num and from Melissa, as people new to realist research, there's always the question around interview questions. So it comes up again and again and again and again. How difficult was it to pose your questions to get the answers that hint at those hidden mechanisms? Now, I've done a lot of interviews myself, so I could answer that, but from my perspective. But from your perspective, I wonder if you could tell that, because when you said that, I could have written down that first interview, mine was disastrous. My very first realist interview, so I can totally relate to that. But I just wondered how difficult it was. Did you settle into a groove, and did you find it easier as you went on?
I'll let Melissa answer that first, and then I'll add my bit.
So yeah, at first I was really nervous. I was a little bit scared to ask a lot of the questions almost. I don't know why I felt like that, but yeah, it was easy. It was just having conversations. So I had all the same experiences as the people who lived in Sanctum 1.5. So that's the way I just pulled out the information, is sharing my experience, noticing if they weren't willing to talk, if they weren't wanting to talk. And so I would just share a little bit about my experience and maybe prompt them to share their experience. So I think that's how we got that data out of that.
Yeah, I think it really helped having done the practice beforehand with each other, just trying to get a feel of how to ask those questions and how to answer those questions. And then the second thing was, Melissa and I always had our video on at the very first, so they saw that there were two people within the actual meeting. I introduced myself. I explained that I myself was also a mother. I've got 2 kids. And then I would respectfully close my video and mute myself and just let Melissa have that conversation. And the first time, I think it was just, we weren't sure about the flow of things. We like half called Tracy and Maura after. We're like, oh no, what happened? This ended way too quickly. You don't know if we did this properly. And then just recognizing that regardless of what the conversation was, those feelings were still there. Those mechanisms, outcomes were still there. If they were guarded, that was actually part of the research as well. And I think that kind of brought us confidence with moving on to the next question and then the next interview. And then Melissa got into the groove of how to start the questions, how to ask the questions. And then if I had any things that I was curious about or any questions that I thought we were missing, I would just send those messages so I wouldn't disrupt the conversation. This was about Melissa and her interview, but then I would try to get those questions answered as well.
I think you're right. I think there is something about just gaining confidence, one with interviewing, but then 2 with realist interviewing. As you know, on that first interview, I can just remember sitting panicking, saying, no one's given me any mechanism, there's nothing coming. But actually for me as well, in those first interviews, a lot of it was around like fact finding. So just getting, but I'm guessing there would have been a little bit less of that because of Melissa's background. I'm guessing because you already knew so much, there was less generating information.
And also we sent them a set of questions beforehand. So a lot of the times they kind of looked them over and already had the answers, which is really helpful too. So yeah.
Right, I'm gonna have a look through the chat now and see what the questions are. So there's a lot of people just loving these. You should have a look at the chat at some point. There's some really, really, really good positive affirmation for all of you. So I think it's John Preston has got a question. John, do you want to come on, ask your own question?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for the presentation and for all the work that you've done. I think, yeah, it sounds amazing. You've helped so many people, and that's great and makes me really happy. I'm doing participatory research, and I'll probably be working with people a lot remotely. So I'm kind of curious, like, what is your advice on how to really keep building those relationships with people when you haven't actually physically met, and when you're spending so much time doing such intimate, cognitive, emotional, relational work with people, but like, yeah, it's all through a computer. Like, how do you manage that? What advice would you give? Thank you.
Good question, John.
Again, I'll let Melissa speak from the researcher lived experience perspective, and then I can talk from my side.
I think the biggest thing is just listen non-judgmentally, and be open to their stories and like take them in and understand them, and yeah, just to keep their stories safe. I guess that would be the biggest thing. I think that's the biggest thing, is just, yeah, listening and understanding them is the two most important things you can do, and getting them to open up to you.
The other thing is when you're working online, there is no such thing as a 9 to 5. You have to be flexible to their schedule. They're the ones with the live experience. If they're not feeling well that day, that's it. You cancel the meeting and you rebook it another time. It helped that we were in COVID and that we were able to work through not a 9 to 5 kind of schedule. And then in terms of when we were doing the workshops, I would screen share and I would go through that together at the same time. So if they weren't computer like technical savvy, I would be clicking, they would give me the response, but I would be typing in the answers, and I would be clicking in the clicking whichever multiple choice they decided to choose, that kind of thing. And then just recognizing that, yeah, it's not the vocab. If you go through for example, if you're doing a workshop, go through the workshop beforehand by yourself, try to figure out what words are going to be tricky, and then try to have those ready to go before you actually do it with patient partner. I think that helped as well.
I don't think there's any doubt, but the fact that Melissa was from Sanctum and had been through Sanctum made all the difference in the world, especially with the virtual connection, because there was almost like a pre-existing trust that was there. It still needed to be reinforced and built on, but that pre-existing trust, you're not an outsider, you're one of us, was critical.
Yeah, I'll just add a little bit to that as well, because I've done work with or interviews specifically with former students of residential schools. So I, as a non-Indigenous researcher, and Gary alluded to this as to the rather poor reputation of researchers with the Indigenous community, because we don't sometimes honor reciprocity, we don't give back, we don't always study the things that the community prioritizes. One of the things that was really important for me in doing that piece of work was to have support of the elders. So the elders in Indigenous communities are leaders, they're the spiritual leaders, and oftentimes that is how I've gained trust as a researcher, is to have that relationship with the elder. All of this, and as students, you never want to hear this because you just want to get your research going and get done. It takes time. So my advice would be to be patient and to really put that work into the pre-study, if you like, and building those relationships that you need to build in order for your work to result in something that you feel proud of in the end and is valuable to community.
I'd also add that one of the things that we did is that Melissa, Anum, and I met regularly. I don't know if it was weekly. Sometimes we'd even touch base twice a week. And I think it was the way that we thought about the data, that it was individual stories, and so we'd read it and then we talk with each other about what's important here. And Melissa would always have her she was kind of the validator, right? With the lived experience to say, no, I think that maybe this is going on. And then we would go back and we would look to see whether we could find those patterns in other people's stories. But Melissa, I think, was really critical for navigating and interpreting the data. And it was that constant contact with Melissa and Anum through that analysis process that was so important. And, you know, Joe and I do that too. We meet weekly. Amelia, who's a student working with us, it helps to build that kind of rapport with each other so that we all bring our own perspectives and add something to it. But the lived experience is really critical.
Yeah, I agree, Maura. I think that the lived experience comes through really, really, really strongly in this. I think there's an absolute mountain of love in the chat for all of you. But if I've missed a question, can someone raise their hand? Because one of the things that I've actually written down as you were talking is, how was it for Anum? So we've heard a lot about how it was for Melissa, but just how was it for Anum, learning and doing and teaching all at the same time? How was that journey for you?
I mean, it was my first brush with realist research as well, but I had amazing experts on the team. Like, I could literally call up Tracy or Maura and be like, help me, I don't know what I'm doing, kind of. So that really helped. And we had weekly meetings, which also kind of helped working with troubleshooting, because especially when you're working with a community research, there's different interests that lie in different areas. And so I remember there was like at one time the community was kind of misunderstanding what we were saying. And I was like, oh, okay, we need to have a conversation. And Dr. Groot, Mr. Groot, they call surgeons Mr. here, so I've automatically called you a Mr. Dr. Groot had like kindly taken a presentation, discussed what we were trying to do, what our timelines was. And I think making sure that you had open communication with everyone, especially when we were getting stressed. And I think having built that connection with Melissa, I could tell when Melissa was starting to get a little bit anxious or a little bit overwhelmed. And then I would have personal conversations with her, making sure that we were on the same page and everything was okay. So it was an amazing learning experience going through the entire process.
I can imagine. I bet it's been fantastic. So I think Londette has raised her hand. If you want to come on, ask your question.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I was just typing it in the chat box, but let me just clear that out. So thank you so much, Melissa, Dr. Anum. And I'm calling from Baltimore, Maryland, here in the US, and I'm so glad I've been following this Realist chat to be here for this seminar. So I was typing in the chat box that I so appreciate you, Melissa, for your patience and persistence with the academic research world. I'm an associate professor at the University of Maryland School of Medicine, and I'm working with co-researchers of lived experiences surviving cancer on their cancer journey. And so I want to be sensitive and respectful of their time and everything else they have on their plate. And for you, knowing that you too have a lot on your plate, what did you find was most helpful hearing from the researcher to be sort of cognizant of your time, and how did you fit it all in? So I hope that was clear.
Yeah, so we were very flexible on our team meeting with Anum. Like, she was always very flexible. Like, if my baby all of a sudden, you know, she needed to eat, like I was breastfeeding, I would be like, can we take a 10-minute break and come back? So yeah, that was the most important and the best thing about our group was, yeah, just being able to meet where we were at. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. It sounds like that whatever needs that you had, they were very sensitive to that. So, and I don't know if Dr. Anum, you had anything to add?
I
of
think
how
the
you were
big
able to be
thing was,
helpful?
like I was listening to, the big thing was taking our time. So like we took our time reaching participants as well, and then just communicating. Like that's the biggest thing. If a lot of times, if you're not being able to communicate with like a researcher, like a person of lived experience, then you're not understanding where they're coming from. They're not understanding where you're coming from, and that kind of causes barriers, I think, sometimes.
One thing I'd like to mention as well is, from a practical standpoint, we paid Melissa as an employee. We didn't give her these honorarium, which are the standard practice in what's called patient-oriented research, which is how we funded the research. We hired her as an employee of the University of Saskatchewan, which means she alluded to her work history before. She now has that as a credit on her resume. And that, the question, anything different we would do, pay her more. We paid her at sort of the rate that you could pay someone, and we did give her a bump up along the time. But I really think institutions have to rethink how they engage in a practical way people with lived experience, and get away from the tokenism. That's one of the ways to get away from the tokenistic role of someone with lived experience, is you treat them on a more equal basis. And so I think that was something that we did that was a reasonable way to support and value Melissa.
Yeah, and we've done this now with a few of our more recent grant. We just build that into the budget, that the people with lived experience that are co-researchers are treated the same as a master, someone like a NUM was.
I think that's really important, and I think it's something that we're moving along. The tide's shifting, but I don't think it's actually going very quickly. And I think we're still at that sort of tokenism. We'll give you some money for an hour's worth of your time situation, as opposed to embedding them in the research team as one of the research team. I think it's vitally important. I think, as you've demonstrated, you end up with much richer findings. I think one of the things that will stick with me forever is that what you found was unexpected. I think the words you used, Guy, were off the radar of the team. And I think that just speaks volumes from the research that you've done. So I don't know, Jacqueline, do you think that people have answered your question, or would you like to ask it yourself and see if anyone's got any different, or were you not sure if it was answered that, or if you're looking for something slightly different? Are you still in the room, Jacqueline? As it's quiet, we'll assume not, or you've got some technical difficulties, but you can put them in the chat. So I don't know if anyone else has anything else they want to ask the group, because we've got 10 minutes left till the end of oh, she's from Norfolk. I love going on holiday in Norfolk, but actually, yes, I can agree. The signal is absolutely atrocious. So it's not very good, but it is a very beautiful part of the British Isles. So I don't know, Jacqueline, if you feel that we've answered your question, say so. But if you want anything else, so then please just say so. So I think Zoe Abbott has got a question. Do you want to come on, Zoe?
Oh.
Hi, Zoe.
Sorry. Yeah, I was just wondering. I'm delighted that you were able to recognise Melissa's contribution properly. There are challenges in terms of getting adequate funding, and that's something that we as academics need to make sure that we apply for properly in the first instance. There's also I don't know if it's different in Canada or in Australia. In the UK, we have people with lived experience. I work in health research, so there's often people who are in receipt of various types of benefits. And I wondered if there was kind of any difficulties or challenges and how you overcame them in terms of managing that balance of paying appropriately and any effect it'll have on any kind of other income.
Well, it took me a second to understand your question. Yeah, it still has, if you're receiving a salary, it does have potential impact on other benefits that might be received. There's no question about that. Melissa, do you want to comment any more about that?
Yeah, so I have a partner who works full-time. He started working full-time right after I got out of Sanctum. So we weren't really collecting any benefits. And I was looking for an opportunity to just be able to provide for my family. So this gave me the means to.
Perfect.
Yeah. But I know with social services, they do allow you to make like a certain amount over what your benefits are. So I think they allow you something like $200. But if you go over that, then they'll actually minus it from what you collect. So
Yeah.
I think, is that what you were trying to get at with your question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not everyone
so,
could do. You were doing it quite full time, so it was it was the right payment.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting. I think it's a knotty issue. A lot of people probably don't know, but I had a serious car accident many years ago, and I was actually in receipt of benefits, and I would actually have put myself in one of those situations where it was almost like a trap for me. I couldn't get out. So there's one way to look at this, which is necessarily, engage with the people who might be the researchers and find out from them what it is they would like and where they see their future going as well. Because although they may be in receipt of some sort of state benefit, they may wish for that not to be their life forever. And this can be one route out of a benefits trap. And then the repercussions of that can be really, really valuable going forward. So I think there's lots of ways of looking at this, but I think especially in this country, and the way the differences and the different types of benefits, and depending on whether you work a little bit or a lot or not at all, depends on what you get. But I think it's definitely worth engaging with the community and seeing what it is that your potential participants may prefer. Is probably the best way to approach it, I would say. Does anyone else have any more questions? We've only got a few minutes left. Like I said, there's loads of love for this in the chat. I'm really looking forward to paper coming out.
Joe, I just thought, Melissa, do you when you talk with the social workers at the two sanctums, do they, well, especially Sanctum 1.5, do they counsel about work or help with finding employment?
No, I think the biggest thing that Sanctum, they like it to be a 6-month program, so 3 months before you have baby, 3 months after. But they focus basically on you just being with baby and being able to learn to take care of baby, working on your addiction if you have an addiction, working on regulating your meds if you're on meds, those types of things. So I think that working with a social worker to get an income comes after. They do help you apply to like assistance, so you can get support that way. But no, they don't really focus on you working or going to school while you're in the program for that short time.
We just have one more chat from Jacqueline, who, as she's in Norfolk and struggling with signal, I will ask. She says, can I ask Melissa what learning she's taken to the next research project she's involved with? Would she have enjoyed working with another partner with lived experience? I think the other person, the gentleman that was involved in your research, was someone else with lived experience, the one who sadly died early on.
Yeah, so he was from Sanctum 1.0, and I was from Sanctum 1.5. So yeah, he had lived experience. And the knowledge that I bring to my next research is everything. So going through the questions when I started with my other research project, I think I was initially supposed to just be helping with asking the questions and stuff. But now I've gotten to the point where we've asked the questions and we're gathering data. I'm using my Nanivo skills. I've been using, like everything that I got out of this research, I'm now using in this research. And I'm also working with another peer from Sanctum 1.5 as well. So I'm teaching her as we go too. So I think that's really cool. Like I'm being able to actually teach somebody now, kind of. And yeah, I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that is. It's like a ripple effect, isn't it? As it goes down. Oh, that is fantastic. So I think we are literally now, we've got like a couple of minutes left. So if anyone's got any final questions, we can do that. Otherwise, we'll say goodbye. As always, I do hang on. So if anyone's got any questions they want to ask, particularly about their own research or everything, I usually hang on for the end, and we'll see if we can help you signpost you into whatever direction you need. But yeah, once again, fantastic presentation. Absolutely, I think the best I've ever facilitated. So absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much. And I'm really looking forward to reading the paper. So when it comes out, give us a ping and we'll advertise it through our networks as well. So although Maura, I'm sure, will give me a ping. I do meet Maura plenty. So thank you, everyone. And I'm sure the room will start to go down. But if anyone wants to stay on, I'm more than happy to answer any questions.
Thanks again for the invitation.